with how many dudes, we have a big question mark, which is like, okay, this game's behaving very differently than previous ones. So will a free update actually make us money? Which again, none of our free updates in the past have ever made us money. We've just burned money doing those, with the idea that in 10 years they'll pay themselves back. So will this be the case where actually a free update for this game will make money? Because if that's the case, then we can do those. Like that changes how
potentially.
Yeah, we could potentially do more. And see what happens, right?
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 586 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the weekly podcast for indie game developers. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the web developer.
I'm Sam, the artist.
We are Butterscotch Shenanigans. Today's August 14th, 2020 quick.
August 14th.
Now here's the deal. Yeah. Before we get into the episode, we got to mention that if you were watching this on YouTube, you might have noticed that last episode, our eyes were crazy. We had insane eye contact with the camera. So it turns out that in Riverside, there's like this little checkbox.
And Riverside is
this is the recording
thing we use,
web app that we use. There's this checkbox to have with the power of AI to just force everybody in the video to be making eye contact with the camera whenever possible. So that's just whenever it detects enough of an eyeball, then it just whips right up to the camera. It's creepy and uncanny. We didn't turn it on purpose either. Either it's checked by default now and we didn't realize, or it is right next to another box that we do have to check for managing, like swapping the camera, whatever, based on who's speaking.
Perhaps an errant click of some sort.
But yeah, we got that on our checklist now to make sure that doesn't happen on future episodes, because that was creepy.
Yep.
Don't like that. It is that reminder that for AI stuff, regardless of how you think about all of it, AI shit should never come between you and a person you're trying to interact with, right? Yeah. So you should never be whipping someone's eyeballs around in a fake way, right?
Yeah.
To make them feel like, ooh, I'm looking at you. You know, it should just be either you're looking at them or you're not. Those are your two options.
Well, it's funny because we were talking about, like, the reason it's creepy. There's a couple reasons. One is we've all been on video calls for many years now, and we know what it looks like to be in a conversation with somebody in video call, which is that you basically look at that person on the video when they're talking. Yeah. You don't look directly at the camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just the idea of eye contact with the camera while in a video call is just creepy and weird. Don't like that.
Don't be doing that
at all. But yeah, we won't be doing it. We'll keep an eye on that in the future.
Like this.
Just constant eye contact on that button.
Yeah. So if that freaked you out, sorry about
Understandable.
That. Freaked us out too. It was also funny because somebody mentioned it in the YouTube comments pretty quickly after the episode went up, and they were like, something's uncanny. Is there some AI thing going on here? Because your eyes look like they're melting. And I'd already watched the episode. Usually I don't watch the episodes, but recently I've been listening to them when they come out just to be like, what are we doing on here on this show? You know?
Is this good sometimes?
So I was like, I was getting my coffee right in the morning and stuff. I just had it up on my phone, and I'm not like watching it. And it's also on a tiny screen, you know. And so there were no red flags for me while I was watching it. And but then back on my desktop, I was like looking at comments. This person mentioned it, and then I kind of like skipped through the episode a little bit to be like, what are they talking about? And then as I was doing it, just being like, yeah, there is something like,
what is this?
Something is like off. And I wasn't 100% sure, you know, if like, well, and it wasn't until we went back into Riverside, like tooling back end, and we were like, there must be something in here, and then sure enough found that checkbox, you know, and then we were like, okay, so that, well, but it was like,
it was a thing, yeah.
But it was one of those, it was like just off enough that like something was awry, you know.
That's essentially what all the AI shit is. It's like you're reading something, you're like,
something's off,
weird.
Something feels weird about it.
Go to a website, you're like, feels a little cloddy.
Feels off,
you know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But
so sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we'll work on that. But otherwise, this episode, we're going to be talking about the current status of how many dudes based on the data that we have. And then we're going to go into a bit of a freewheeling discussion about post-launch support and updates.
I think debate probably given our pre-episode discussion on the topic.
So. Yeah, and this is something I think that's probably useful for us to convey to our audience is that we as a studio, like we are not a monolith where the three of us especially generally disagree on some level about most things.
Yeah, just everything.
So,
but we can usually come to an alignment where we're after we debate enough, we're aligned in values and overall goals. And we talk in other episodes about how important that is for your team. Like,
and in many
everyone's gonna be
cases,
aligned, big picture, right? And so we can come to some strategic decision where we're like, okay, we're going to move forward with this. Everyone's comfortable with this, right? Even though there's a lot of debate and disagreement before we settle on those.
And usually we will, we try to land a spot where we agree on the high level concepts and principles behind things. And there'll always be infinite nuance and counter examples and edge cases or whatever. But, we've always found that kind of the most important thing is to agree to move forward in some direction, even if we don't necessarily agree on everything. But so we'll have some probably.
You could hear a little snippet of that, basically, more of the arguments that we have internally.
Spirited debates.
Yeah.
So let's talk about where How Many Dudes currently is at. So we are now just past 2 weeks.
Yep.
2 weeks in a day.
2 weeks in a day. So just past 2 weeks, we're at 232,596 Steam units.
We're closing it on that 250,000.
Well, therefore, I think
crazy.
we're definitely going to hit 250,000 by the end of the month, by the end of launch month, based on kind of how the sales trajectory is looking. So that's cool. We have 317,000 wish lists, which, if you recall, is just 10,000 more than we had when we launched. And it's funny, if you look at the charts on SteamDB, they have this wish list activity score, right? That you have based on, I think it's based on like how many changes and followers you have. And I don't know if it's also based on maybe some like basically wish lists that disappear too, maybe. I don't know exactly. It's like have volatility in your wish list count or something like that. And it's been funny because usually when we do a launch, we get just way more wish lists during that launch window. And we don't eat all of them. It's usually you end up with far more than when you started the launch. So this is a bit abnormal for us, but it's because on the back end, what we can see is just the number of wish lists that are coming in and then the number that are being consumed as people actually purchase the game is crazy high, right? So as it kind of proved itself over the first week.
We gain we gain a wish list and we convert one.
Yeah.
Just kind of.
I think it will be fun because I did, a long time ago, there was this debate that was happening in the indie space of is there a risk of having your store page up early and having people wish list early, because those wish lists, because the idea was like a wish list is not a wish list, right? It depends on who did it and whether or not they are going to convert, depends on all kinds of factors. And so the idea was if a wish list is 6 months old when the game comes out, does that make it less likely by a lot
to
age
convert? Affect a wish list?
It does in one sense. That person may have died in the meantime.
That
could have
but from a population standpoint, does it like dramatically decrease the rate, right?
Yeah.
And your Steam data does include basically wishlist cohorts, and so that data is available to you as a developer. It's not available publicly, but like you can go piece it together, right? And so I did that analysis when this debate was raging, and found that no, there's basically no impact. The consistent thing was like people who wishlisted basically the week of launch had the highest wishlist conversion rate.
Makes sense. Yep.
Which makes sense, right? Because
there's a recency bias.
That's a recency bias,
right?
Right?
People pay attention.
But there was no other kind of decay, right?
Yeah, wishes do not age.
They don't. They basically don't age. And it was basically, I guess, it was sort of two cohorts. It was also the people when your store page went live who wished
the first week,
also
because those are fans typically.
Yeah, those are fans. Yeah. So your fans and your people who basically are like, "Hey, this game's coming out." Like those two groups have a high rate, but everybody in between. For 6 months is just a constant rate. So this debate was ongoing. We did analysis, which means that I know we've got access to that data, which means we can answer this question for
how many dudes, which we'll do in a while because we want to let things settle, But I'm excited to get into that data to ask that question. Like if we look at Crashlands 2 and how its launch wish lists behaved, right? Yeah.
Like once the game was out and you have that new behavior of people wishlisting it despite being able to buy it.
And that it's on sale.
And that it's on sale and all this kind of stuff, right? So like if we're looking at these between these two games, is there, because it looks like from the population level data, there must be something really different.
Yeah, the behavior's different for sure. Yeah.
But until you look at the cohort stuff to be like, does it just happen to be, right? That the rate of these two things happening are fully independent and just happen to balance each other, right? Or is it that people are basically coming in, wishlisting, and then buying once the game is released, right? Which is not something that it seemed like we were seeing with Crashlands 2, but may have been. It just may have been that these other things that were happening like were behaving really different. So that'll be a fun analysis to do in a few months or months or something. Yeah.
So we have the other things happening then is basically we're completely falling off on all of the like the lists of things, right? Like the top sellers. So that's finally all that has decayed off, and our launch sales stopped yesterday. So yesterday we went down to around
expecting a bit of a cliff.
Yeah, we're sort of a good cliff here. So yesterday was around 3,600 units, right? Which again, still very, very good in terms of like comparative to Crashlands 2. That's 20 times the number of units that Crashlands was moving on day 13, right? Mm-hmm. So much better than like just in terms of volume, right?
Was the sale already done, or did the sale end?
No, this was so day 13 was a couple days ago, and that was about 7,000 units. And yeah, that was
so
that
it
was
looks like
the day
we like
that was
halved our daily sales. Okay.
Yeah, so that was the day that was about 20 times what Crashlands 2 was doing that same amount of time.
Yeah, we also did, because we're doing a lot of crunching this week. So because we also saw sort of over these 2 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. At the we saw these like 2 steps of decline where there were big steps, and they both happened on a Sunday. Right.
Yes.
And the first one was like 25%. The second one was like 15% of just like a drop in overall stuff. So we're guessing that has something to do with Steam stuff. Not exactly sure like which things, but presumably Steam store page turnover things are happening, and that causes like the overall visibility to just drop by a significant chunk all in one go. So we saw that pattern already. And then the guess was that once the sale stopped, we would see something similar where there's just another like big drop. But then otherwise, hopefully the dynamics stay the same. Just the overall like
just the rate is
scale kind of drops.
Yeah. And so that's basically we still have the open question, which is where are we when nothing is happening? So hopefully by the time the next episode comes out, and certainly in like 2 episodes, basically, we'll have a couple weeks of data then to be able to say like what it appears our kind of standard just chilling rate has become. And that's always a big question, because that tail is where, at least for as an independent studio who's actually independent. I don't mean indie. We are independent. We don't have any external funding, right, for this kind of thing, which means that we typically have planned everything around the tails, because that's launch money. Just like is a windfall, and you have to put it in a pocket and forget about it. Otherwise, you spend all of it, and then you don't have enough money to finish the game, right? And so we typically try to operate on that tail, and so that's always still a big question for us. So hopefully we'll know, I think in 2 weeks or so, what that looks like, at least on Steam.
Or at least the goal anyway is to be able to operate from the tail.
Yes.
Practically the tail is always gets so low that it's just a small fraction of our costs.
Yes.
And so we have to distribute
maybe it'll work
that launch windfall across the whole tail, right?
Yeah. And Sam, to your point about saying like, well, we'll probably hit 250,000 sales by the end of the month. That's not necessarily guaranteed, right? Because
it's not. Yeah.
Because we've got about 18,000 units left to close the gap, and about 16 days left. But because as the days go on, we're going to be falling off of more and more feature spots. The sale is done. So like, if it drops down to 500 or 400 units a day or even lower, then like, we're probably not going to hit that, right? So we have no idea. There's also some interesting kind of demographic trends, or regional trends rather. So like our Chinese audience is just declining rapidly, interestingly. Mm-hmm. Just day by day, it's just dip.
And by rapidly, we mean more like what we've seen in the past for a launch, as in like you get that big launch spike, and then it quite rapidly it just starts to decay to the tail.
Yeah. So we're unclear on what exactly that means and why that would be happening. But we're not seeing that same pattern in other places, really.
It's kind of variable. So I think the 2 most interesting ones, and also ones that have the most numbers, so that they're the cleanest, right, are Chinese and English. Not the U.S. and China, but because we're looking at just language breakdown. So English and Chinese is that English is incredibly flat, like truly, strangely, incredibly flat. Like we're looking at daily active users and that kind of stuff, right? It's just the same peak, the same trough.
Basically, whatever rate players are leaving is fully met by whatever new rate of sales is happening.
Yeah. So, and that's basically kind of between things shifting, right? So it's like between those 2 Steam things I mentioned, where like the overall scale just like dropped by 20%, right? Like those happened for the English speaking audience, but then between those events, flat, right? While for Chinese, the daily decay was strong enough that you actually don't see those drops in Steam because the regular decay is big enough, right? And so it's interesting when we're looking at our data is like the net data is what we see in most places, right? And that just looks like a relatively slow but steady decay.
Mm-hmm.
But what it actually is a mix of a non-decay, which is weird and cool from English-speaking players, with a rapid decay for Chinese-speaking players. And then everybody else makes up a small enough fraction that the impact on the overall behavior is low. But that's pretty variable. It also varies a lot by platform. We're doing like platform breakdowns and stuff. But most other languages are also decaying, just not as fast as Chinese. Just English specifically is just like flat, right? Like remarkably flat.
And we don't really have a theory.
I mean, I have a very vague theory, which is the theory of critical mass, right? Which is because the idea that we have in general is that a game basically has its launch where it becomes known. And so the scale of your launch is basically what kind of dictates how known the game is, how broadly people can be aware of it. And then after that, you have basically just the social activity that maintains whatever the tail looks like, or growth, or whatever happens, right? But where that social activity,
you're relying on word of mouth at that point.
Yeah, word of mouth, influencers making videos, basically like a consistent and sustained pattern of basically the game's community, maintain the game. And because you think about this with any game that you've played, like for me, Balatro is always a good example. Where I didn't buy Balatro when it came out. I heard about Balatro when it came out because it was such a huge launch. But I just kept hearing people around me talk about it. Right? Just kept hearing it. And then eventually I got it. And then I was talking about it to everybody, right? And so people were selling Balatro to each other after its launch, right? But that, like, as we all know, like the whole idea with this marketing stuff, right, is like you see a game once and you're like, oh, that looks kind of neat. And then you never think about it again. If you just don't stop seeing it and people don't stop talking about it, then you buy it eventually, right? And so there's a critical mass that you have to get to of both like the scale of a launch and how much sort of social activity that game creates.
Where there's just like a network graph that's just like a net.
Yeah, you basically have a network effect.
And I think it comes down to what's the chance that any given person who is sort of in the gaming space, like just a player, right? What's the chance that on any given day they hear about your game?
Yeah, from somebody,
from a friend, from a YouTube video, from Twitter, from TikTok, whatever. Like, what are the odds of that, right? If it's zero, then obviously,
bad.
Yeah, it's going to be rough for the tail.
And then I think the reason we see the segmentation by language is because all of that stuff is necessarily language locked, right? Because like if somebody in the Chinese audience who like loves the game and whatever is making videos about it and talking about it publicly or whatever, that's all in Chinese. I'm not going to see that.
Yeah.
Nothing's even going to show it to me, and if it did, I wouldn't.
They're separate social graphs, basically.
It's separate social graphs by language, right? So you get all this like the launch behavior of the game is a sum of all of the localization or the locale dependent behavior in terms of like visibility on Steam, all that kind of stuff, right? But the tail part, the part where now the people are selling the game to each other, you're building community, people are interacting with each other about the game, all that kind of stuff, that is fragmented dramatically by language. And I think with English, we had
some kind of a steady
hit
state.
some kind of a threshold that was high enough that we're getting enough videos, we're getting enough activity like on the subreddit and in our discourse, like because everything that we maintain is English only, right? And the vast majority of our marketing efforts are English only. We did a lot of Chinese stuff too, right? But that's necessarily limited because we can't do it, right? We're relying on third-party stuff to make that happen. And it's like such a separate system that we just are more limited to what we can even try to do in the first place. And so I think we basically have we managed to hit enough critical mass with the English-speaking audience that it went into a self-sustaining mode.
Social thing.
Yeah, social thing, which is what we would hope for, right?
Well, we've heard from a few people, like one of our QA testers, Carl, who a lot of our communities interacted with in the Discord. He said one of his kids went to school and some other kids came up and they're like, "Hey, you should play this game called How Many Dudes?" So again, it's like,
exactly.
People are we're actually hearing stories secondhand now about people recommending it.
But there's got to be enough critical mass to do that. And my suspicion is that there are levels of critical mass that also, because all these things decay, right?
Yes.
And so now this is the first time we've had a game that, because of the way the game was designed, because of the way it was marketed, and because of the scale of the success, right, managed to, at least in one language market, managed to hit a level of critical mass where there's like, at least for now, at least to some extent, there's like some kind of
sustain happening,
self-sustaining, right? And my suspicion is that those things, just like the non-self-sustaining behavior, are just as kind of fickle as the rest of it. It's like a way of spreading it out. But since that's also going to be decaying, then the scale of self-sustenance, right, dramatically impacts how self-sustaining it is, and does it grow, and how long does it last, and all this kind of stuff, right? And it feels to me like we managed in English
just managed to get it
to just get out of there. So my guess is it's going to at some point kind of fall out of quote unquote self-sustaining, right? So, but at least for now, it's like the player community, press, influencer activity is basically like preventing what would be the normal loss we would be seeing in English, right? And at some point that might fall off, at some point it might not. But for other games that have like huge levels of success like Balatro, I still hear about Balatro.
Oh yeah, and if you look at those graphs of its launch, it peaked 3 weekends after its first bit, right?
So in other words,
that's a different graph. That's like you're not just sitting there.
Well, then the tail is like a whole quarter of the peak.
Yeah.
The tail is so fat.
The tail settled higher than our peak. And then
than any game we've ever launched, right?
Yeah. But then there's another trick that you can do that Balatro managed to do, which is just win Game of the Year.
Yeah.
Because once you do that, which is super easy, you just do that. And then right around that wasn't so Adam, you were going back and looking through their concurrent players, right?
Yeah.
And like as soon as they started winning Game of the Year awards.
Yeah, because they were in the tail. It was tail behavior.
Yep.
And then the announcement that they were nominated for Game of the Year happened. That was on November 18 of 2025 or 5.
And it's because there's a bunch of Steam pages and stuff that come with this, like
all kinds of stuff happened, and they had in effect a second launch. Like it literally, like if you look at
it shoots right back up again.
Yep.
Yeah, man, it looks exactly the same. Like the curve, the peak is the same height. The curve is the same.
This is part of the self-sustaining behavior you're talking about, which is like because I had actually heard Balatro mentioned several times earlier in the year, and I never bothered to look into it or buy it. You know, I'd heard about it.
It didn't hit high enough of a.
But then when it starts winning Game of the Year awards, you look back and you're like, maybe I should do it. Maybe I should take a second look.
Yeah.
I've been here. I mean, I've heard it mentioned, and now it's winning game. And I guess it's a really good game. And you know what? It is.
Yep.
So,
well, so this kind of gets into
that's part of that self. Like, is there's a level that you can hit, like they did, right? Where then they get Game of the Year, right? And now all of a sudden, they've moved into new markets that previously were basically unaware of the game, or like Seth, you're describing, had vague awareness, but it wasn't something that was like popping up into their consciousness all the time, right?
Well, it's like the next time you're going to buy a game, if you've been hearing about this thing and then it wins Game of the Year, you know, it's just going to be top of mind. So you'll just go pick it up.
And now you look at the tail of Balatro, like post that versus pre that, right? And again, like it settled exactly the same way it did. It took a little longer to settle because there was probably a lot of stuff going on, right? But still basically the same. But then the new tail that it settled into was like twice as tall as the one before, right? And now
they have like 500,000 people in their subreddit. I mean,
that's crazy. Yeah.
At least last time, maybe not. My numbers are slightly off, but
it's a lot. I mean, whatever it is, it's a lot of people. But it's that thing. It's that idea of like every aspect of all of this is on power curves. Every aspect of it is like you're trying to sustain something, trying to catch some algorithmic flight. We're trying to do something, right? And there's a tier we haven't hit before, which is that the public is basically like really dramatically impacting what's going on with the game sales, right? And my guess is that we only just hit it, and it's going to be different by region and different because like the tools people available, how they get news about games, how they share goods with each other, all that stuff varies a lot, right? So it's not like, because like English is our most popular language for the game, definitely by like almost 2x, right? And so the numbers are just bigger, so it might, like from just a number standpoint, it's more likely to hit critical mass, right? But also what it takes to hit critical mass is probably going to be different by
depending
language,
on locale.
right? Yeah.
Well, I think this is actually dovetails nicely just into the overall segment for today, frankly, because the whole question here, and this is one question that we've had a set of answers to in the past with our previous games, but because how many dudes seems to be functioning a little bit differently in this tale, it's a refresh question for us, which is: you finish launching a game, you're looking at how these numbers are shaking out. How do you decide what the heck to do after a game launches? So whether it goes well, whether it goes poorly, basically what are like the strategic benchmarks we're using to think about post-launch support or post-launch updates, free updates, DLCs, whatever. Like how do you wrap all these things together? Because basically, out of what you're saying is that you can somehow, oftentimes, get some kind of like doubling your sale thing happening post-launch by winning some awards, or like
not often, but it's possible.
It's possible.
As in, like, it basically never happens, right?
Correct.
But it can happen.
Yes.
Right.
And you can approach things like always doing free updates in the case like, I don't know, No Man's Sky, for example. Or you can do DLCs, or you could just be like, we need to go make something else. So we're still in that position.
I think we should start by kind of enumerating what the things are we could do, just like big picture,
right?
Ignoring even what how many it is.
Sure.
And kind of like what the reasons might be, because the reasons aren't just, because you already mentioned a bunch of like, No Man's Sky and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are complicated goals that aren't just,
yes,
what's going to make revenue or can we afford it, right? There's more. So I think we kind of hit like what the things are we could do and what the possible reasons we would have for doing those things are.
Yeah.
And then we can go into like,
so I'd say number one is just is actually just moving on immediately.
Yeah, that's the easy one.
So the reason you do that obviously is because like the game it didn't sell well enough to even bother with a post-launch update. What we mean by that is like firmly our belief that, and I think it's largely borne out that if you launch a game and it does poorly, as in like it is not going to make the revenue back in any kind of reasonable time scale that you've already put into it.
Which implies that it doesn't really have much of a player base.
Yeah, and so this is distinct from the game. Like the game was well received. So I think level heads are kind of an example here, right? As in like the game itself like didn't need to be addressed, right? The game is
it already is highly rated, right?
People like it, all that kind of stuff. We just can't sell it.
Well, and arguably because we were in early access, but we didn't do the early access thing of like launch a half-finished broken game and then unbreak it and finish it. It was a finished game when we launched into early access, and we used early access to gather community feedback as sort of our post-launch support, basically. Mm-hmm. And throughout early access, there was some periods where every week we would do a content update.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until we did localization at the end when we had to slow that pace down, because then you have this localization pipeline. But what we found with Levelhead, at least for that game, and this is probably true of most games in a similar situation, which is if you launch a game and it doesn't really find a sizable audience, then it's incredibly unlikely that you'll be able to update your way into having an audience. Because if the core of the game is not hooking people in, then adding an extra feature on top of it,
it's usually not going to do it.
And there are rare cases where that's potentially possible, such as a case where you launch a game that people are excited about, but you flubbed something dramatically about the game.
You're like, oh, fuck, it's like a multiplayer thing. You fucked it up.
But I think importantly...
then you can recover that potential.
Well, but I think importantly, if you don't have a big group of players waiting for that update...
Yeah.
Right? So, people might point to Fortnite, which started as a zombie apocalypse survival game, right? It's called Fortnite because you built a fort overnight and you had to survive. And then they hijacked the PUBG formula and basically made a whole new game inside of their game. But the original Fortnite, it didn't do well by AAA standards, but it still had an audience, right? Yeah. And also, that's a good example. The Epic money behind it to relaunch it, basically.
Yes.
Or Final Fantasy.
But I actually think that's a good example. Is I'm not familiar enough with what the trajectory looked like of Fortnite, right? But like my vague, osmosed understanding of it was that, like you're describing, it was a AAA level flop, but not like a flop, right?
Mm-hmm. It's not like it had 500 players. You know what I mean?
So there were a lot of players there, but it wasn't really that it had a second launch. It was that the things that they changed that made it so that the existing players found the thing about the game that was extremely fun. The thing that it also did was created that network effect so that those players are now bringing in other players, right? As in, like, I don't think they like did another launch. I think they converted the game into something that could, that could basically break containment and could basically now use the social graph. And as Seth, as you're saying, there already was a social population there who could start building that graph, right? So that was how you can like convert it. But because otherwise they'd have had to dump it.
Well, and importantly, I would argue it wasn't even. It's not like they patched in a feature. They patched in a new game.
Well,
like
that's what we're getting at. Like that's the point. Is like you cannot like update a game to be a success. I guess it's not the sort of thing that's going to.
You can update your way out of bad reviews.
Yes.
So, No Man's Sky so Final Fantasy XIV, I think, is one of the more interesting examples because they launched the game and they got a massive influx of players at the beginning because Final Fantasy, MMO, right? People are always looking for the WoW killer and all that stuff. And it just was bad. Like there were just all kinds of things about it that just absolutely sucked. And the player base was just immediately like, what is this? And, players that oftentimes if a game's in a really bad state, you'll see these almost like manifestos where players will be like, here's all the things that need to change about this game. And they'll just like, right. And so this was happening for quite a while. And so Final Fantasy XIV, they didn't just do an update. They like turned it off. They shut it down.
Yeah.
And they just reworked like everything top to bottom. And they essentially relaunched it as a brand new.
Well, I think though, and it's so. But what you're talking about there is like, is everyone complaining about what the game is, but still wanting it?
But there are still players.
Yes,
right. So there's people. There's people who want the game to succeed,
right?
And they see they want the update. Right.
Well, that's what I mean.
I would argue it's a different thing entirely, which is that game people want a Final Fantasy game that they like. They don't give a shit if that was Final Fantasy 14 or whatever.
But it's
like, as in, like they don't care about
that. Because if somebody sees the potential of a game. And then they get it, and then that potential just isn't realized. They want that game. Like, they want that game to deliver on what they could imagine it to be. Yes. I think No Man's Sky is kind of a similar story, right?
Yeah, I think largely what you're going to see there is why I think typically you see so many games that do really well, especially AAA games, have like a mixed or even negative review score, right? It's because people want the game as it is like.
It is maybe somewhat delivering on the.
Yes, it's just not quite delivering on the promise, but it still is delivering enough for people to buy it. And I think in those contexts, then, and again, we're still trying to talk about in the indie context. If you have that going on, what you should be seeing there is you actually are making enough money that it would make sense to do an update. If that makes sense, right?
Because there might be people who think the game looks interesting. They see that it's being poorly received. Like, well, I'm going to wait and see if they actually fix all this shit that everybody's complaining about.
But again, you've had enough people buy it, even though it is poorly received.
Right. It has an audience already.
Yes, it has an audience. And I think having an audience is the number one question mark about any game, like any game you're going to launch.
Yeah, but there's like two reasons you would do that update in that case, right? Mm-hmm. Where one is because you think you can convert sales that aren't happening, right? So if you're thinking that, okay, because we got this mixed review score, when people come look at the page who do want it, they're dissuaded because of the negative reviews, but those same people we suspect would, if the things that those reviews are talking about are addressed, then those people are likely to come back because they're fans. They're fans of the thing. They want the thing. They just want it to be good when they get it, right? And so that's where the financial side of like the question of do we do that update? And then the other one, which I think is more of like where the No Man's Sky thing lives, is your goal of having a long-term positive relationship between the studio / publisher and the population of people who are playing the games, right?
You don't want a reputation as, oh yeah, we just launch broken, unfinished games and then move on. Yeah. Like that's not good. That's not
because
good.
in that case, and like because it could be the case, I think in a lot of cases, especially ones we're talking about where you don't already have a huge player population, all that kind of stuff, you're not, like we said earlier, you're not going to update your way into the game being successful the vast majority of the time, right? But you can update your way into dramatically improving your relationship with the players that you do have, right?
Or like and the qualitative review score of the game as a result, right? Kind of those are synonymous in this case.
Which and there are many benefits to doing that, and especially long term, right? Because it's going to if a publisher is looking at your portfolio and like everything they see is mixed reviews, like that makes you it makes you suspect as a potential business partner, right? If everything is very positive, well, that looks really good, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to launch a game in the future and you want your players or your past games to come back to that one, if all of them are kind of meh because of janky parts of the experience, like they're a lot less likely to be excited about the next thing that you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, also, there's just wanting to have a good relationship with your player base. Right?
Yeah, and just do right by them. I mean,
just do right by your players.
If you're this maybe is less of a concern for large companies, maybe.
Seems like it, yeah.
But for us, it's like we take a lot of pride in our work, and we want it to be well received, and we want our players to be able to pick up the vision that we're trying to put down. And if we feel like we fell short of that some way because it's not being received in the way that we hoped, then for our own
just
peace of mind,
done basically.
Because it's like we want to do right by our players, and so in some cases, even if we don't have much of an audience or a good financial reason to do an update, we will often do one anyways.
And I think Crashlands 2 is a good example of that, right? Which is Crashlands 2 did fine, right? But its cost was so high that any more time we spent working on Crashlands 2 post-launch was throwing money into a pit, right?
Yes.
There was no way we were going to recoup. But we did it because there were enough complaints about the game that we thought were reasonable, where it felt like the player response to the game made it feel like the players felt like we didn't put our best foot forward with that thing. And we wanted to leave the game in a state where that's not how people felt.
Yeah. And again, this is thinking in our case, because we owned the game. So it's not like a publishing thing where we would have to split the value of doing that with someone else again, by half or whatever else. But because we own it for the next 10 years, the theory is that probably it'll net out like over that 10-year streak.
Yeah, it may eventually. Yeah, sure.
May. Yeah. But yeah, not a good idea actually, in terms from a strict business.
Well, importantly, with each of those updates we put out, there was no sales. Like every time we put out an update, it's not sales, like if we go back and look at our sales graph, it's not like, oh, because we released this update, we got a new spike in purchases. No,
I would say there were sales, but because they're paired with actual discounts. Right.
Sales, it was just normal discounts. That's where it came from. But the updates themselves did not have any kind of a financial return. We just did them because we just felt like it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. So again, so you can do nothing, which often is the thing you should do. I'm going to be honest. Like that is oftentimes the thing you should do. You can do
if the game doesn't really go.
Yeah, if it doesn't really go.
Yeah.
Because again, there's not this
and
idea
even
that
if it does, like you don't. Because the question is like, if the game launches really well and does great,
and has great
everyone's
reviews.
happy with it. Like you're almost definitely going to put out a hotfix update that fixes some shit, right? Almost definitely, right? But if everything is going extremely well, the game is really well received, and like even if it's doing extremely well, that doesn't mean you should just go update it, right? Because also updates change how the game works, right?
Yes.
And that could be a plus or a minus, and it's a whole. Games can be done. Games can be finished.
Yep, that's fine. Yeah.
And I think most games should launch in a state where you intend it to be finished. And I think what most of us discover is like, oh, I guess now that we're seeing how it interacts with players, now it doesn't quite feel finished. So then you finish it, right? Potentially, right? But if it feels finished, if it's working as intended and all that kind of stuff, right? There's just no reason to go.
Well, I think this is where the question marks come in for us because of the difference in behavior with how many do sales work versus some Crashlands. So again, you could do nothing, which is oftentimes the thing you should do if the game is not selling well. You can do like what we typically do in the past is like an update or two that's largely then meant to address the reviews, and this is done for the long term idea of the tail of this game, right? So
we also do them fast because part of the question too is when, right? And we dedicate basically all of our resources post launch to whatever updates we decide we want to do and getting those out.
I mean, we even did one for Levelhead, even though the launch totally flopped and it had been in early access for over a year. So we had been doing constant updates for over a year. We still did a post launch update.
Yeah. And again, a lot of it comes down to I think we do feel a lot of responsibility to the players that are like the community who's in it. And I think in the case of something like Levelhead being such a weird one where the community was so into it, but so small.
I think part of it was we just refused to believe that we couldn't find a way to get people.
Yes. We felt like we had a few potential paths to explore there, and we did. We explored all of none of them worked, but we tried. So that's the other one, which is just like you have a strategic question. Sometimes you get, and again, this comes down to the idea that like we are saying something like, okay, probably you cannot update your way to success if the game is not already hitting some benchmarks for you at launch. But again, you might have a theory about like, oh, well, it's actually maybe that's because of this thing I did, and I just need to basically like tweak some aspects of this thing to get this working. Again, I largely think that balance updates do not matter in terms of post-launch success.
Absolutely not. No, they can't. Because that does only matter to people who already are playing the game.
Exactly.
If your problem is you can't sell enough units of the game, the problem is upstream. You got to solve it upstream.
If you're like, this flamethrower does 10% more damage, that's not going to generate sales.
Yeah,
it's going to improve the feel of the game.
To me, that's the main reason why, if you're trying to update your way to success, why it can't work, which is because where success here is defined as like having a large player base, right?
Yes.
At what point do players decide to buy a game? It's not when they're already playing it, right?
Yep.
And so there's literally no update you can make to the game where that update makes a player buy it, unless something about that update dramatically changes things upstream. Like Fortnite. It's a new game now.
Yeah,
right?
it's a new game actually. Yeah, or changes the social graph, right?
Or changes the social graph.
Yeah. So
which requires there to be enough players that you can change the social graph.
It requires there to be a social graph.
Yes. Or again, like in terms of like if the marketing just wasn't present. So this is assuming that you like actually attempted to market the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you attempted to market it and no one picked it up, that is a very negative signal, right? That okay, maybe this isn't going to go. But if you think again, that's like, oh, I just need to tweak how I'm talking about this now that I've had people play it, which this does happen sometimes. You have players play it, and you're like, oh, actually, the way I was thinking about it was this, but I can actually much better communicate the pitch for this whole game like this. And then you do an update synonymous with like a discount and reaching out to streamers or something like that. So basically, like
you pull every lever you can.
Yeah, the second launch attempt thing, right?
Yeah.
Knowing
that you lost access to all, because Steam is launch focused.
Yes.
So you've lost access to all of the Steam tools that can leverage what you're doing there, so that in your best case scenario, it still can't come close to what it could have been if you already had all that stuff at launch.
Right. So again, most cases don't do anything. Some cases where you just want to leave it there, recognize that you're just going to take a business hit maybe, but you're like, I'm just going to let this, I want to finish this, like do right by my players, right? Whatever. Again, you don't have to do that because it's very important to note that this will, if you do this repeatedly and forever, you typically will just go bankrupt and not be able to make any more games.
Yeah.
So it's important not to like fall on your sword about this too much, Yeah,
because if what you're doing is you're like, if I can just like, okay, that change didn't make it suddenly successful. But this one might, right? No, you're gambling now, and it's not going to pay off. It's not going to work.
You're throwing money pit.
Nothing's going to be as big of a deal as a new game.
Yes.
If you have a game that has no players or very few players, that's past its launch window, yeah, I mean,
and this is a big part of why this industry is so risky and so difficult, which is because it is so launch dependent. And if you don't nail a launch, recovering from not nailing a launch is even harder than a good launch is already almost impossible. Recovering from a bad launch is then impossible times impossible, right? Yes. Like it's really hard. And so that's part of like what makes it, I don't know, existentially horrifying for game developers, right? Is that there are many really good games that maybe even could have had a good launch, but because the developer didn't know how to market it, didn't try, didn't whatever, right? Then it now will never find its audience, just literally never, right? And that's
even
horrifying.
Been times where like people launch their game and then there's a Steam outage, and then no emails get sent out, and the Steam store is down for most of the launch day. When it's like there goes 3 years.
Well, and there was that one game I remember reading about where Steam otherwise was working fine, but Steam didn't send out the wishlist email. Right. Yeah. And without a doubt, the wishlist alerts and emails are doing a lot of the work of converting your past marketing efforts into your launch.
So in that case, I think Valve went and tried to like rectify.
They tried to give them.
They resent it, but now it's happening like outside of the launch window. It's like so now all of a sudden all those things
it's still not going to be as good.
Compounding, then you just took it all away, right?
Yeah.
So there's those two kind of scenarios. So you want to fix it up and then leave it. You want to just move on. And then there's the like, okay, again, you can't update, you can't add stuff to it. You can't add trees to a forest to make it a different forest. Okay, so that's kind of the way I think of it. You can't like change the flamethrower. You can't add a flamethrower and make it somehow like now everything's great. So then there's the the other track, which is like you do have some theories that you want to test about what exactly is missing from your game, maybe. So this is you're attempting to get on track, but you need to do something actually with it, or using it as a marketing beat.
Yeah, and knowing again that either you're trying to sell more units, which means that has to somehow make its way up to the top of the funnel.
Yes.
Right? Or you're trying to improve the social graph, which means that it has to give people ways to interact with each other or reasons to talk about the game in public or whatever.
So updates generally should be composed whenever you're making an update for a game. And I think this is probably, frankly, for all of the updates, you should think about it in those two layers, which is, okay, is there something in here that players who are already playing, basically will make them both come back and then give them something else to share about it, right? Or something else to talk about. So come back and then bigger social graph. Or is there something about the whole thing that you're with this update that is actually going to improve potentially the top of the funnel effect of like, it will be a more interesting game because of this update for people who
aren't already playing it.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, which is also why, so for a game like Crashlands 2, this was incredibly challenging because it's a narrative driven game.
Yeah.
And it has, so we added some new pets and stuff like that, but a lot of the stuff that we added in the post-launch updates were things that come later in the game, right? So if we add, even like the strange creatures update, where after several hours into the game, you'll start to see these like marks on the map of these creatures that you can go hunt and get special items, and they're like mini bosses basically. But that's just like an extra cool little feature. But if you are, in your first few hours of playing, nothing has changed for you.
Yes.
In the game, which is why it sort of How Many Dudes is shaped in such a way that we can actually update it, and then every player can experience that new content immediately, right off the hop. So different shapes of games are more or less updatable from a content perspective.
And I would think also an important thing to just be thinking of too while you're thinking about this is that what we're saying, the two things that it will have like a business effect, right? Because we already addressed the just having good vibes effect, right? So the two things that business effect are modifying the behavior of the social graph or modifying upstream abilities of the game. Mm-hmm. I would argue that there's almost no update in the universe that any game can ever have that really impacts the upstream marketing, right?
Yes.
Because it's like, what can you do for any game where somebody who was looking at it previously was like, not for me. They're looking at it again, right? Still never having played it, still not knowing the context of any update that you made or whatever, right? And they're looking at it, and now somehow the thing that you did, that you brought up into the marketing, that you brought up into the Steam store page, right? Somehow that was the thing.
I disagree on one dimension. On one dimension, which is essentially how that ties back into the social graph, in the sense that, like, I think No Man's Sky is probably a good example, where it launched to, I believe it was, I don't think it was fully negative, but it was definitely not good.
Yeah, it was bad. Yeah.
Because there was just this overwhelming sense among the player base that all of the promises of the game were broken. And like Sean Murray was weirdly cagey about things when like people were he even went on like TV and was doing interviews.
He's on the Bear show.
Yeah, and people would be like, "Oh, is there a multiplayer in this game?" And he'd be like, "The universe is so big that like you'll never even be able to find the other players," which is not a no. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so, but it turns out no, there wasn't, right? And so when that game launched, I was looking at it and I saw the response. I was like, well, I'm not touching this game. Yep. And then they just kept updating it. So again, it's like, it wasn't one update, which I think this is where you're right, Adam. We're like, one update is probably not going to move the needle. But
you're describing as a change in player sentiment for a game you already were interested in.
Yeah, which is different. Yeah. Adam's saying,
which is a fundamentally different thing.
But importantly, like I didn't buy it until they did a bunch of updates, right? And
but that's a different thing. That's basically saying you have a scenario again where the game is already selling, but you want to improve the tail. Right.
Exactly. If had nobody bought No Man's Sky to start with, then I wouldn't have been aware of it and keeping an eye on whether its updates were improving it. Right.
Correct.
And so I think the idea is like, it's hard to update your way into awareness.
Yeah, but also because the things that they were changing and stuff, right, were like, I would argue that those didn't. You're correct that they changed the social graph. And I would just say they didn't impact marketing except how the social graph does, right? Because they made a million updates, and many of them were huge, right? But if you hadn't already played the game, there was no way for you to be like, oh, I see that update.
They were just making it so that the promise of the game was becoming more aligned with what the game actually was.
Yeah, I had no idea it was in the updates. I just would periodically check back on the review score.
Exactly. Yeah.
But again, that came from me already knowing about the game and checking back into it. The updates didn't like pop out in a way that like came to me. I was like, oh, they finally updated that thing. I'm going to go take a look. It didn't go that direction. It was just me every now and then going back. And again, for other people, it may have been different. Like it might have been that, maybe some people were like, well, I'm not going to touch it until it has multiplayer because that's what I was interested in.
Well, I think the point there is you have an until, which you don't usually have with any given game.
Yeah, if the game completely flops at launch, you're not going to have people waiting around and be like, well, once they add flamethrowers, I'm in.
Exactly. People are not waiting around. And so I think that's what you need to be attuned to with a launch of a game is like, is it actually connecting and resonating in a way already that's good enough that, I want to do some of these other things with, or that I can sort of do an even better job of what that thing is currently doing in a way that causes people to sell the game, kind of on our behalf later, or again, that is possible to just do a repeat marketing beat. So it's also the case with How Many Dudes. This is the first time we've had basically 2 large spikes of influencer activity for a game. This is very important to note, right? This has never happened before. Like we did the demo and actually
we've barely ever even had one spike.
Exactly. So we did the demo and got a huge spike. And that drove tons of interest, right? As we've talked about before, 100,000 wish lists, whatever, in a couple weeks. And then we also, for the launch, managed to get another big spike. So the question is it possible then, if we do a big update, that we can do that again? Because that would make it worth it.
Again, like because of the shape of How Many Dudes, we've already announced that we plan on adding some new dudes. We don't know what that looks like yet, whether it's adding a new family of dudes, adding a dude to each existing family, or whatever. Like we haven't, fully landed on what that's going to be shaped like. But when we add new dudes to the game, everybody who has How Many Dudes can boot it up and start playing with those dudes. Right.
So it kind of suggests that, again, the shape of this thing might look very different from the previous projects where that wouldn't make any sense to do.
Right? Yeah. But again, it's because it's all of it's impacting the social graph, right? Because I would describe this particular kind of marketing as actually, again, social graph stuff, because we have this influencer base who already made videos basically both times, who are fans of the game.
Yep.
So it's easy to market to them an update to the game because they know what that means, right? And it'll be easy or relatively easy. Who knows what will happen, right? It'll be relatively easy if they've stopped making videos, because like people are always doing new stuff, right? To be excited about the update and then go make videos about it again, right? And then we get that huge spike. And if the audience for those, because we're not so successful that the audience for those big streamers and YouTubers is players of How Many Dudes, right? We're nowhere near that, which means that that's an opportunity for more people to be sold the game by what I would describe as like social graph interaction, right? So this game has all the things that you would need for an update to be a marketing opportunity.
Well, and this is probably the first time out of any game we've ever made that it looks like there's a possibility that we can do an update and it might actually allow us to market the game again.
Yeah. And again, more so than just previously what we do is we would just pair the update with a sale on like a discount on Steam, right? And
which we'll probably do again.
Yeah, we definitely do it again.
A nice way to do it, but
because it makes everything go, for a minute. But like,
which also means you can never disentangle. Did the update do it?
Yeah,
right. Or was it just a normal discount?
Although again, people who already own the game aren't excited by a sale. Yeah. Which again, like brings back into like most of the time, the best you can do with like an update that does something is you change the nature of the social graph, right? Again, that's people who are already on the game. So you can leverage that, but
beyond that, I think you're kind of out of luck. If it's not selling well, it's not going to sell well because you update it a little bit. You know what I mean? That's just like
it depends on the shape of the update too, right? Because you can see really successful games. Like if you go look at Belatro's like daily active activity, right? Go try to find when they launched their updates. Can't see it, right? Why? Because their updates don't change how the game works. Their updates are like the cosmetic card things where it's like, friends of Balatro with like the,
are they still working on is it the 1.1 update or something? 1.2 update? I can remember. Because they've done an actual update where they added more like jokers and stuff, right? And then there's like another.
Oh,
one
I don't know. Maybe, yeah. Maybe you could find that one in there. But if you look at like their early updates, like in the tail, which are basically these cosmetic things, right? You can't see it. Can't see it in the tail. Of course, that's also for a game that's already extremely successful and kind of already saturated its market in all kinds of ways, right? Or at least you would think. Except again, they literally just doubled the scale of success of their game.
Well, no, because if we're talking about concurrent users, right, then the idea is like an update that has something interesting for people to come back for should affect the concurrent player graph.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Is it depends on the shape of like what. So yeah, I'm basically saying like a cosmetic, like an update. You can't have an update that's like, oh, I updated the game, therefore this happens, right? The update has to do something that is exciting
to bring players back.
Yeah. And so I think there's basically then the last category is like getting into DLCs, right? Which in my mind you only do if you've done a free update and you could tell that the free update paid for itself, right? In other words, when you did a free update, you are able to both remarket that thing, right? You see the players come back. All the context is actually already proven in that free update way, where it's like people want to come back to this game.
Right.
Again,
you're saying if people don't come back for free, they're definitely not
going to pay for it.
They're definitely not going to pay for it.
So I think before anybody who like does it, whenever studios,
it might even come back, but just if you release free stuff and people don't engage with it, or
exactly,
it doesn't really land, then charging for it will not really.
Yeah, well, because I think part of the nuance there too, right, is for DLC, you're not necessarily relying on people to come back if you have a lot of active players, right?
Yeah.
And so yes, I think it's like, because DLC has the attach rate problem, right? Which a DLC can only be sold to people who already own the game.
Exactly.
Right. And that's
frequently only people who are currently playing the game, right? Yes. Again, someone who's like, I wasn't playing this before, it's not like a DLC is going to bring me back necessarily, right?
Yeah, it would have to be.
Well, and in some cases, people might be thinking about buying the game and then see that to get the full content. Whenever I look at The Sims, I'm like, I would never can't afford this.
Yeah, well,
I can't pay $1,000 to play The Sims.
I don't know. It's like, to me, like the hyper business, like AAA side is not really relevant. It's like more like I'm looking at like Clay or any other smaller indie team who does do some DLCs for their games.
But it kind of depends if it's framed as sort of like, so for example, if you're looking at mobile, like on the Google Play Store, it'll literally just say contains in-app purchases. Mm-hmm. It won't say like contains only one in-app purchase for $3. It's just contains in-app purchases. So if somebody's looking at the game, deciding whether to buy it, then now they're going to have to do a bunch of extra legwork to figure out what the shape of those in-app purchases are by like looking up a bunch of stuff about the game to try to see, is this going to be nickel and diming me constantly, or is this just like an optional DLC?
I don't know. I think generally probably it doesn't really, like the presence of a DLC, I don't think it matters that much to 99% of people. You know what I mean? I think it's more so just from a business standpoint, it's a question mark of like, don't bother making one of those if you haven't proven that it would already be picked up in a free capacity. You know what I mean? And then
I would think of it, and outside of that, because I don't think you just really have to have proven that, because it's a risk either way. So you're deciding if you're going to take the risk, right? And I think I would just treat the same way you treat like platforms and languages, right? Which is like there's a high cost of adding a language, there's a high cost of adding a platform, and all of those are basically some kind of a multiplier on top of what is already going on. And there are rare cases where like adding simplified Chinese, for example, on Steam, that's potentially a large multiplier, right? And you also have those surprises where like for whatever reason, like a streamer in a particular region or whatever picks it up and then it takes off, right? So it gives you more chances of like a random spike, right? But at base, though, what'll happen most of the time is you'll just have a small multiplier bump. And so the question of, is it worth investing my resources into doing? And so I'm mostly against DLC from a business standpoint, because to me the risk is so high because two things have to happen, right? Which is that the cost of creating it has to be low enough, coupled with the likelihood that the existing player base goes and buys it, that you because if you don't much more than break even, then what was the point? Just go do something else, Right. And I think there's a reason why you mostly only see DLCs with extremely popular games, right?
It's the only context in which it makes sense.
Because if they've already got 1 million people playing every day,
then the fact that
update
a tiny fraction
to bring people back, it's there to make money, right?
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the pocket where the free update, the ideal is that every time you do a free update, that it does actually work to reignite your some of that social aspect of it, and actually just sell more copies and then put you in a fatter tail period afterwards, right? Because
I think Terraria is a good.
Yes, Terraria is a classic example.
They just kept updating, and the game just kept selling copies, and so they just never stopped.
Because then essentially it's players are getting free DLC, right, or like free updates if because they are already paying players, but their activity coming back is what then re-engages to get someone else to essentially cover the cost of the fact that they're getting free content.
Well, again, that brings us back to that idea, right? Which is that you've got you can make a change that impacts upstream marketing. You can make a change that impacts the social graph, or in this case, with a DLC, you can make a change that impacts the people who are playing the game now, right? Mm-hmm. And the only real thing that can do, if it's not in order to change because if you're trying to change the social graph, give it to everybody. That's what changes the social graph, right? You want everybody to be interacting with it to change the social graph. And I would argue that in general, social graph is going to be far more powerful of a tool for you to sell more copies of your game and do have the game be a success, have players be happy, that kind of stuff, than a DLC could ever be, right? Unless you've already saturated that, and almost no games will ever saturate that.
Yeah, I think that's why you typically only see them in basically in either the absolutely gigantic indies, right? Hits so Don't Starve or whatever else, or largely in the AAA space, because one, it makes more sense from a business standpoint. If you feel like your marketing has managed to saturate, right, your audience, where it's there's not someone who's going to play Monster Hunter has played it by now. You know what I mean? The game is still selling copies every day. I'm not saying it's not selling.
If we had 100,000 concurrent players,
exactly, it would make more sense.
We'd probably be thinking about a DLC.
Yeah, because you're I don't know how to make that higher because that's crazy.
Yeah, that's so many players that you're not really looking at how do we bring in players. That's not really your question anymore. No. Or how do we reinvigorate interest in the game? The interest is there. You don't need to do that, right?
Yeah. So if you're Clay and you've launched Oxygen Not Included, right, which I just pulled up to look at it, it's got 7 DLCs, right, ranging from $13 to $8. The base game is $25, right? So if you buy all of it, you're spending a lot of money.
It's a AAA game, right?
Game, right? And each one of those presumably adds a really large amount of stuff to the game, right?
Well, typically you'll see them. It's usually a free update paired with a DLC component, right? Because that way you're trying to do all this at once, kind of all the time. But from a fundamentals perspective, the fundamentals of the game and of the business still have to be there. You still need to be selling enough units. You have to be able to answer the question of what exactly is this update doing for you? And I think that's always whenever we're arguing about stuff. And again, going back to Seth pointing out that when we argue about things, it's always basically for 3 different angles. The first and the highest level point is just, what are you trying to do with this? And is this actually the effective mechanism for doing that? Or are you basically twisting it up where it's oh, I really want to make my players happy, so I'm going to do a post-launch update. It's well, you have 12 players, so maybe don't go bankrupt.
It's nice to make them happy. Don't get me wrong, but there's not very many of them.
Yeah, but they're not sustaining you in any reasonable context. So maybe you got to figure out some stuff, move on.
And again, there's also the communication layer with this stuff too, right? Is if you've got 12 players and you have to abandon a game because it's just a money hole, right? Mm-hmm. You can put up an announcement that's hey, unfortunately, this game didn't take off, and I can't afford to keep working on it, right? And players are once you have a lot of players, the really unsympathetic little fraction becomes a problem, right? Yes. Before that, on average, it's a pretty nice vibe. Well, if you're communicative and you're telling people what's going on, and people understand, even if there's a segment of the player base who believes that no game developers should ever make money, right?
Right. We don't worry about those people because they're not worried about us.
Yeah, just ignore that.
It's fine. Mutual
outside
apathy.
Of that, yeah. Outside of that, everybody understands that even if they believe that you shouldn't make a lot of money, right? That they understand you gotta feed yourself.
Yeah. Well, and they'll be disappointed because if it's something that you've made that they like, they're gonna want more of it. But if you can't deliver it, they'll be disappointed, but hopefully understanding. But you can't, throw yourself onto your own sword just to avoid disappointing 10 people. You know what I mean? Yeah. You got to survive.
Yeah. I think that's where the communication part of this is so important, because so much of what we're talking about here is navigating player expectations and how players are going to react to things. That's the risk of DLC, right? Is that there's a significantly large contingent of players who can never see DLC as anything but a money, quote unquote, money grab by, right. And so DLCs simultaneously, we'll take one population of players and make them upset, and take another population of players who like the idea of buying more stuff in your game and make them happy, right? But that unhappy contingent tends to be the bigger part when it comes to anything where there's post.
They're louder. I don't know if they're bigger,
they're louder, yeah.
Louder, yeah.
But where there's any kind of post-purchase purchase, like that group of people,
or even
become a problem.
Even a simultaneous, like the GTA 6, sort of the fact that they've segmented the game out into, there's like, here's some extra content that you just got to pay extra for on launch day, right? Before you even know if you actually like the game or if it runs well on your
But
machine.
again, I think that's the important note is in almost all these contexts, you have already sold the idea of the game to a person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the rest of it,
if there was nobody waiting around to buy GTA 6, they probably wouldn't do that DLC.
Exactly. I think that's the important. It's like
there'd be no reason.
That is the hardest thing to do, right? Is to just be able to make a thing that people want. To be honest with you, that's the hard thing to do. And then after that, you're trying to answer these questions. Like, okay, I did make a thing that people want. Now we need to test some stuff or see. So in our case, with how many dudes, we have a big question mark, which is like, okay, this game's behaving very differently than previous ones. So will a free update actually make us money? Which again, none of our free updates in the past have ever made us money. We've just burned money doing those. With the idea that in 10 years they'll pay themselves back. So will this be the case where actually a free update for this game will make money? Because if that's the case, then we can do those. Like that changes how
potentially.
Yeah, we could potentially do more. And see what happens.
Yeah, but again, it's like the attach rate problem. Because an update is going to be focused, has to be focused on the social graph, right? Then, because otherwise it's an attach rate problem. It can only be a fraction of what's already happened, right? And so that means that for updates to do that, they got to focus on the social graph somehow, right?
They have to make the game. They have to make the game interesting enough and add more remarkable things, meaning things people want to talk about, such that once the update goes out, then you get a big spike of Twitch streamers, YouTubers, people talking about the game. That's what's going to drive.
Yeah, but my suspicion is it's going to vary a lot by game, but my suspicion is that this is still a decaying, like best case scenario, it's still like a decaying thing, as in like you got your launch and then we'll have an update. And even if the update does really well at driving new things, right, and causing new stuff to happen and giving this nice little spike, right, that the likelihood of it being even close to the launch is very low.
Very low.
And presumably each one you do, because like it's this matter of, because if we're relying on the social graph, then it's a matter of like people's sustained interest, how excited a person can be, and the population of people who maintain that for a game they've already played and are interested in and so on, right? It decays. So even in that best case scenario, like you can only afford to do it so many times, unless you're Terraria, in which case you can do it indefinitely because you have literally infinite money. Right?
Also depending on what the graph looks like. Again, it's like it might be the case that you do if we're basically on a line that we've never been on before, at least on the English speaking side, of more sustained organic sales, basically because of the shape of the game, and with the game's design, it's easy to slot new stuff in that might keep the conversation going or make it even more active.
Yeah, because the cost has a huge impact on this.
Right. Then it might be the case that you basically are able to, by doing a couple of those things well, get it from going completely flat to being actually a little bit up. At which point, again, the math
at least for a while, Yeah.
So I think we
that's the idea, that self-sustaining part, right? Is if you can amplify the self-sustaining part in some way, like you're saying, go from flat to growth, right?
Yeah.
Then
or even decaying to flat. Well, would be nice.
Yeah. So we haven't. This is uncharted territory for us. So we've not been in a case where we've seen any of this kind of behavior on the graph side for us. So we'll try a few things basically before we pivot over to something else.
Yeah, we've always done post-launch updates, but it's always been with the full understanding that we were just throwing money into a hole.
Yes.
Yeah. Now we don't know whether that's going to, we're still going to do the free update for how many dudes, but we don't really know what the consequences are.
Well, and it's also the opportunity cost part of it, right? Because it's not just, is there some way, what's the likelihood, et cetera, that we can get a positive ROI on the post-launch activity for the game, right? It's also, what could you have done instead, right? Mm-hmm. And the instead parts include business development stuff where you're like trying to, because of those, depending on what your team is and who's doing what and where your bottlenecks are, right? Take a lot of time. But those can like dramatically
by that impact. You mean basically getting the game onto new platforms,
getting on new
Or bringing us
platforms,
to
like
China.
publishing into the little Chinese market, like that kind of stuff, right? Those are extremely time expensive and other expensive, right? To do these kind of things. And if you got a tiny team, then that's going to also dramatically impact your ability to do anything else development related, right? But it's possible that the potential upside for that is far higher than even the best case scenario update, or vice versa, right? You got to evaluate this stuff. And of course, also the next game, right? Because most of the things that you do to an existing game at best can have some impact proportional to the current success of that game.
Right.
Usually like a fraction of, but even if it does somehow amplify it, it's amplifying it by a fraction of again, right? So it's like, it's not like the best you can do is some kind of small-ish probably multiplier on what's already happening. A new game though, if it does as well as your last game, literally doubles. That literally doubles what's going on, right?
Now you got two tails.
They got two tails. But of course also the next game could fail catastrophically, or could be the thing that 10x's what you've ever done before, right? And so the opportunity cost you have is actually, it's not just can you afford it, and it's not just is there a positive ROI. It's also what's the opportunity cost of spending the next
But I would say importantly,
2 months, 6 months.
A new game doesn't have a ceiling, and a DLC does, right?
Yep.
Like people who haven't bought your current game can't buy they're not going to buy the DLC, right? So, the new game it's the upper and lower bound risk. It might do nothing, but it might actually do.
And depending on what your new game is, it's kind of a DLC, you know?
Yeah.
If it's like step 2 in a franchise, right?
Yep.
Then it's going to have a better attach rate than any DLC you could have done for the first game, right?
So you to launch it like a Deep Rock Galactic Survivors or whatever else, right? It's like, or Vampire Crawlers, the dungeon crawler thing. It's like same vibe, very much same vibe, but just a different take on it. And it's something else you can sell and launch. So I guess we'll kind of figure out what the heck's going to happen with this, but we're going to try it. We're going to try it and see. Put together a really beefy update, put it out, do some marketing with it, and see if it does more than we think it will, or have experience in the past. But then even after that, you have to wait for the tail to come in. So
there's all these the indicators of what's happening is very laggy.
Yeah, and also because you never do. It's not smart to do just one thing, right? Because all of these things are amplifying effects, especially marketing.
Meaning, like if you put out an update, but it's not smart to just only do that, but then say nothing about it and not also. You're always doing 10 things at once.
Yeah, and you're trying to pile on top of each other because you're trying to catch the flywheels of algorithms, and you're trying to catch enough attention simultaneously that you can spike up into the self-maintaining part of the social graph, like all this kind of stuff. Right? So you're trying to simultaneously do everything at every opportunity, right? And that also means when you're then trying to tease apart what happened after the fact,
it becomes impossible.
You can't tell it because like we're going to do a sale when we launch that update. So that immediately immediately we're like, okay, is it just because it was a sale?
We could have maybe just put it on sale. Maybe that would have been enough, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I do it.
And you'll never know.
I want to time it out so we have a sale between now and the eventual 1.1 update so that we can have at least some
sense of
baseline idea of like, what was our sale behavior like?
Yeah, we don't currently have a timeline on the 1.1 update. We've been working on it. So Sam was gone this week on a vacation. I'll be gone for a week in September. And we're just kind of like just getting the initial stuff settled.
Yeah. And we're adding new languages, and so adding new languages takes a lot of upfront time because normally we're kind of doing it throughout development at least a little bit, so it's kind of spread out, right? But now it's like, hey, as fast as possible, do the whole game,
just all of it,
store page stuff and everything. Right? So there's enough of that stuff that like there's a proximal limit on just how soon it could possibly be. Which
but I think strategically it makes sense to do it in a way that you could probably learn something about it. It's fine if you wait an extra couple of weeks so you can time it with the sale and all that stuff.
And again, the time with the stuff matters a lot too, right? In terms of like if your idea is to try to get people really excited about a game, but they're already playing it, well, then that wasn't a very effective use of your time. Right? But if it's been so long since they played it, they're like, oh, like I don't really.
Well, and if you've changed enough things that when they come back, there's stuff for them to engage with. So, all right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. I think all the stuff about updates. I mean, we'll have more to say about where things are with the longer term tail of How Many Dudes as the weeks go on. And we'll try to have some more info about what we're thinking about the 1.1 update as well in subsequent episodes. So we'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running, especially now that we're getting hit by a lot of bots these days. So we
got a little too popular too fast. So
we appreciate their diligence. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And of course, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, Google Play, or the App Store and pick up How Many Dudes. It's cooking. You'll enjoy it. You'll have a good time. We appreciate it. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.